Good evening to members and guests both here in Percival House and remotely, and to the public watching on YouTube. Welcome to the third meeting of Scrutiny Panel 4 for 2024-25, the Strategy and Change Scrutiny Panel. This meeting will be scrutinising the work of the Citizen Tribunal and the process towards Ealing becoming a Borough of Sanctuary. The agenda for the meeting is on the Ealing Council website. It's a hybrid meeting, although I think actually all panel members are present in the room as it happens. So turning to the agenda, we begin with item 1, apologies for absence. I haven't received any apologies. Has anyone let any know? Okay. So item 2, urgent matters. Oh, sorry, yeah. Carol. Oh, yes, the chair.
Can you not hear me?
Oh, sorry.
Shall I start again? Denise, apologies. So apologies received from Denise Charles, who unfortunately couldn't be here because she had to work. Some of her colleagues are not well, but she was due to give an account on the Citizen Tribunal element of the paper.
Right. Okay. Yes. I mean that. So yeah, we understand that, and we'll note that she's given apologies. Right. So yeah, urgent matters. There are none. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any? No, doesn't look like it. So matters to be considered in private, there are none. Right, minutes of the meeting held on 29th of October. So the minutes were republished earlier today as there were some minor amendments to the item on Your Voice, Your Town. So members will have received an email notifying them of it, and there are also paper copies available. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes?
I don't know if it's matters arising as such, because we don't have that kind of thing. It was just the issue about the timelines, because I think having discussed it, we got notification a couple of weeks after about events happening in the lead up to Christmas. So it wasn't ideal in terms of things happening, you know.
So yeah, I mean that is straying into matters arising, yeah, really. It's right. So there's nothing else. Are the minutes as amended agreed as a formal record of the meeting? Great, thank you. So now we move on to item 6, the Race Equality Commission Evaluation and Impact Report. So this report provides an update on the progress and impact of the work in response to the Independent Race Equality Commission in 2022. So the panel is asked to consider the impact report and the work of the Citizen Tribunal in holding the council and its partners to account. So I welcome Carol Sam, Assistant Director, Equalities and Engagement, who will present the report, and Amanda Askham, Strategic Director, Strategy and Change, and also Councillor Polly Newstub, the Cabinet Member for Healthy Equal Lives, are also attending for this item. So Carol, can you start us off, please?
So good afternoon, good evening. So this is what the report looks like when it's live. I think you've got the printed copy, digital copy. So the Race Equality Commission report was published in 2022, and as a result of that report listed a number of priorities and demands. It was then accepted by Cabinet in 2022, and since then colleagues across the departments and some of our partners, the police and NHS, have been working with the Citizen Tribunal, this is one of the recommendations in the report. There were 7 priorities, and one of the priorities was the appointment of a Citizen Tribunal. So we appointed initially 10 Citizen Tribunal to work with our colleagues across the various departments, across the 6 priorities, to look at how they were responding to the actions that they put together in the action plan, responding to the priorities. So the Cabinet report presented quite a detailed analysis, which is 100+ pages. So this impact report is a condensed, summarised version of the detailed Cabinet report, which actually went through detail by detail in terms of how our partners and our colleagues across the Ealing Council responded to some of those demands. So what you have in this report is a condensed version, but really looking at the impact. So it goes through the priorities from education, health, participation, democracy, policing, income and employment and housing. Of course, the 7th priority is the appointment of the Citizen Tribunal. And it gives a synopsis of what the key demands are. It looks at what the impact have been. I'm not sure how much detail you want me to go through, but surely after this you can pull out some questions, or if you want to look at specifics. But it gives a synopsis of some of the key impacts have taken place. There are some case studies where we're able to show partners, particularly in the Ealing Education Partnership and Health, where there's been some real successes in terms of, you can't address race equality overnight, but certainly where colleagues and partners are starting to put the actions in place, and we are seeing some notable reductions, particularly if you look at some of the stats in education. So, and at the end of, actually I should say, on the 7th priority, the Citizen Tribunal, it's unfortunate that Denise Charles couldn't be here, because we then undertook quite a detailed survey questioning the Citizen Tribunal in terms of what has been their experience of both working collectively as a group and also the experience of engaging with the partners and colleagues in trying to address some of those demands. There were some, I suppose they were very candid. You'll see from the recommendations at the end, there's quite a few recommendations. It's not done, race equality isn't done, it's a process, but I think there are some definitely notable learning we can take from this. And also, as a model, I think the tribunal lends itself to a model that we can look closely at in terms of emulating, but in terms of looking at how the local community can provide scrutiny and enable us to be more accountable. And I'll stop there in terms of any further questions.
Well, yeah, just before we move on to questions, do Amanda or Polly want to add anything at this point?
I mean, we presented this to Cabinet, and I think we've also arranged an event where we've discussed it in length. I think the really crucial elements for me are, and most importantly, and it's worth repeating, is while this is a check-in on the progress, it's really to thank and celebrate the work of the Citizens Tribunal members themselves. I mean, we owe them a huge debt of gratitude, and it's a shame that Denise can't be here so we can have that formally acknowledged again. You know, they have committed the most incredible amount of time, expertise, effort, blood, sweat and tears in some cases to really drive forward those demands. And you know, as a borough, we should be extremely grateful. I think what it does highlight is, and in the impact report, we've been very careful to steer it in as such. It's not a self-congratulatory document. It's not us patting ourselves on the back and saying, didn't we do something wonderful? I would say that of all of the local authority responses that we've been able to find nationally, and if you remember, this was in response to the murder of George Floyd, we've been able to find no other boroughs that concluded or certainly continued with an approach. I think Sheffield and one other London borough initiated a race equality commission, and I know that Councillor Raza was very instrumental in the initial commission, and that really galvanised a lot of our residents and was very exciting. I certainly remember being, before I was a councillor, looking to the work that Ealing was doing as being really groundbreaking. For us, we have then continued that over the past years, and again, I think that is worth noting. The really important thing for me is really what we do next, and I think the why I commend the impact report to you, because I think it does land a really good balance of celebrating those achievements, noting where they're difficult, but also really challenging both ourselves and our partners in where we didn't respond as well as we could have done. And I think where we have officers who really got behind the demands and worked really closely with those tribunal members, we've seen real successes. In some cases, there were more open doors in education, and some work had already been done in this space. Other areas, most notably, I would suggest, are police partners. It has been I don't think I'm saying anything I haven't said before, but it's been a disappointing response. Now they would say that they already have their train tracks of development that they're going on in terms of their new Met for London, but really they have not engaged as well as they could have done. And equally, that's true of some of our departments, and it's really highlighted for us where we need to be working more effectively together to really think about solutions and the impact that we have as obviously the biggest employer, the largest commissioner of services, the way in which we can influence and must prioritise these equalities issues more effectively. And a lot of that is sometimes getting out of our own way. What I would really welcome is thoughts and discussions on the model of participatory democracy that we landed on. Citizens' tribunals are not without controversy is probably too strong a word, but there's lots and lots of different ways that you can engage residents in the process of delivering services and in governing. And most of us here are elected, so that's one part of the puzzle. But we've been doing a lot of work in the council around co-production boards, where we bring in people with lived experience to really focus our minds on ensuring we're delivering services that are designed with our residents rather than for them. And I think we're seeing strong elements in our other initiatives around connected communities being one of them, to really make the council a much more porous organisation, and for us to be much more effective and meaningful in the way that we respond to those demands and involve our residents in what we do. Citizens' Tribunal is just one of those models. There are many different ways of doing things, and I think it's really interesting to hear the responses of the tribunal members, because there are lots of really positive things, but there's lots of things that we could really have done better in the way that we managed that. And I think it would be good to perhaps have a conversation about what that model looks like for the future. And there's some very specific recommendations they've made for us, and what we expect from people who are in essence volunteers. I would argue we perhaps put a lot of demands on some very well-meaning, committed, dedicated people, and we need to think carefully about the expectations that we have of people. I'll leave it there. I don't think I've got anything else to add. It's a really exciting project to be part of. It isn't the end of the journey, clearly, and it's taught us a lot about what we can and can't achieve if we focus minds. So would really would welcome questions and thoughts.
Yes, thanks very much, and I'm sure we'd be happy to minute your appreciation of the tribunal. I think there's an agreement to that. Yeah, so Councillor Sharon first.
Thank you for the presentation and introduction. Sorry, it's difficult to face the people I want to talk to, and maybe if I move this over here. I just wanted to say thank you first of all, and I appreciate that a lot of hard work has gone into this, and of course it is an uphill struggle. It's an age-old battle, and it'll continue for goodness knows how long. Now the question I've got is, what role does data and monitoring play in the approach to addressing racial inequality, and how does the report recommend using it effectively? Did you get that? Yeah.
I'll start because I have sat in many subgroup meetings with the Citizen Tribunal demanding data from our partners and colleagues, and the data has just not been there. And some of it, the data set doesn't exist. I'll give you an example on the income and employment. One of the priorities, they were quite keen to see how the council was addressing those in the most deprived and those in deprivation, and where was the data, how, and because I suppose we have to remember the Race Equality Commission's report specifically target people from Black and African Caribbean background, and the data set just didn't exist. But what they agreed to do was start to look. So it's looking at the qualitative impact. We can't necessarily have. It's important, and that's something we probably need to think about going forward in terms of if we have to bind those data sets. But in terms of addressing some of those challenges, is looking at actually case studies. So starting to pull together case studies where we can illustrate where the impact is taking place. It doesn't necessarily give you the quantity, but you are able to glean some of the qualitative, but definitely important. Some areas are easier to, like education and health. Those data sets exist, but in some areas it just doesn't. And I think actually just one more thing, the learning for me is also thinking about when we go forward, some of those baselines. So it's almost saying if we look at other areas we need to address, what's the baseline we have now, and identifying quite early on, whereas we need to get in some new data sets so you can measure and see how you make an impact. Otherwise, you just rely on qualitative data, not quantitative.
Sure. Put your mic on. Sorry, put your mic on. Doesn't your mic on?
What are some of the ways the report encourages collaboration and community engagement to address systematic or institutionalized racism?
Sure, yeah.
I think that question on data is absolutely bang on. It was the challenge of probably one of the key challenges of the whole programme, right? Because you have a Race Equality Commission that in its inception is very, very specific about its demands and deliberately so, very specific about changes and elements of change and progress that were expected to be seen within cohorts in school, for example. And then if you don't have the data to follow that up, it's a really difficult thing to do. And I think probably for us internally, and Carol mentioned it, certainly from our partners, getting the data from the police was really difficult. Getting data from our colleagues was often difficult, and it was often, I think, perceived as a way of sort of, oh well, we'll go away and we'll get the data. We'll go away and we'll get the data. And I think that has kind of, and perhaps Amanda can speak to this, but it's really driven a really a changed approach to how we manage and share and use data much more effectively across the borough. And one example of that in my portfolio area is around health inequalities data. We have huge amounts of data from the NHS around all sorts of things, whether it's mortality, propensity for different illnesses, loads and loads of different things that we know in a very detailed way about our population. But we're now been looking at ways of surfacing that information so that all parts of the system and people can share it. So we have a real understanding of health inequalities and therefore the impact of the work that we do to try and change it. So I think it has. And that's why it's such a fantastic question, because it has driven change throughout the way that we do things as a council. Amanda is probably better equipped to talk about that, I would think.
Thank you. If it's all right, Chair, I was just going to briefly refer the panel back to our very first scrutiny panel, where we talked about the health determinants research collaboration. And in some way that was a response to our inequalities data, because rooted right at the heart of that is exploring more about inequalities and why they exist, and having our community researchers and our academic partners. So I think since we've had that panel, we've now recruited 23 community researchers. They've started their training, and we are hearing a lot more and building those data sets, both the qualitative and the quantitative. And I think when Elizabeth came, our academic colleague, she talked about our Cultures of Evidence project, where we are driving evidence into all our decision making. So absolutely key on the data point.
Okay.
Shall I repeat the second question?
Yes, please.
So what are the ways the report encourages collaboration and community engagement to address systemic racism, sorry?
Well, I suppose the whole ethos and the rationale for the report is to do that, and it has to be done in partnership. So I'll give an example. If you look at some of the demands within the education, a lot of that is about working with community groups, it's working with the parents, it's working with a number of residents. So it's the heart and soul of it cannot be done in isolation, and it has to be done with the community. And just another illustration, one of the priorities can't remember which one again, but one of the delivery of that sits within our team, the Your Voice, Your Town. And it's all about how do we then encourage more participation, more collaboration, more co-development, and that is as a result. It's interesting to say, we would have done it anyway, but it happens to meet one of the ambition and one of the demands of the Race Equality Commission was about the council needs. I think it was quite explicit in saying that the council needs to work more in partnership with its community, and actually by having the tribunal members who are part of the community and reflect our diverse community, both with their lived experience and the technical expertise, I think also enhances the process of addressing systemic racism.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about what we do next, isn't it? And I think that's really interesting because I certainly, my sense is that original commission engaged deeply and authentically and meaningful in a way that was meaningful. And then we went away and did the business of, having lots of meetings and the Citizens Tribunal doing their work. What we then do next with the work is, and actually the Citizens Tribunal members were very mindful to be true to those original demands, which was absolutely right. But in some ways was quite limiting. So what we do next and how we engage and we talk to people about what changing priorities there might be, I think is the challenge that we have. Well, not the challenge, it's the opportunity that we have for ensuring that engagement and that collaboration continues throughout the life of the work that we do in our equality space more generally, but specifically through the legacy of the Race Equality Commission and the tribunal itself.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I've got Councillor Haley next, and then we're going to have Councillor Mataza and Councillor Gordon. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that report. I just wanted us to take us back to the priority one in terms of the education. It's good to see that St. Vincent Catholic School is on here because I'm one of their secretary. My children goes to the school. So we started the Black Forum to talk about racism and racial equality over a year ago. And one of the biggest struggles that we had when we started off this initiative was giving parents the confidence to come and talk to us about the experiences their children had experience of, racial attacks and racial bullying and certain words. And it was very horrific, the certain things that, children say to another based on color, race, religion, and all sorts. And it has been a huge impact, but it made a difference in St. Vincent School. But from my perspective as an educator and a counsellor, we struggled with convincing parents that the teachers and leadership are there to support the family and the children. And no matter what we did, it was hard to get through because what they did is they lost trust in the whole education system. So my question is, looking at the improved attainment and the reduction of suspension and the action plan that I mentioned here, and community engagement you talked about, Carol, how can we support parents and how can we encourage parents to come to these initiatives? Because I don't think all of our schools are developing this initiative of having Black heritage, initiative to support Black parents. And I know that it says in the report over 40% of our schools have developed that. Can you give me a bit of more on that information? And is it a list of schools that are, acting on this? And also my last question would be, are we ever going to get our schools, whether it's primary school or secondary school, is it going to be a must for them to have the Black Parent Forum where the initiative is celebrated and encouraged, so racial attacks and racial comments will be dealt with as this way we deal with bullies and any other policies? Because it's a huge difference when we look at in schools, we have so many policies, but we don't have a racial policy that really supports when a racism incident occurs in school. Thank you.
Okay, Carol, do you want to?
I think that those are really valid points. And again, the delivery of this rests within the Ealing Learning Partnership with Julie, is it Julie? Yeah. Julie Lewis and Sarah, but I have attended the subgroup meetings where amongst the tribunal, we have subgroups that then hone in on some of these priorities. And those are some of the challenges. And again, in terms of the accountability and the scrutiny that's being provided is the constant question back to our education partnership. How are you then working with the schools? But if you look at the what next, one of the specific you mentioned, it's looking at expanding the Black Parent Forum. Now, I'm not sure in terms of the details, how they're going to do that, but they definitely do have it. I know they're working quite closely with Park in the community, and they do a lot of work with African Caribbean parents, and I think they're also seen as a better trusted partner. So I think there's an opportunity with ELP working with Park, because they seem to have quite positive results in terms of getting parents on board. And I know they have worked in partnership, but to the detail in delivery, but they recognise that there is still a lot to do. Whilst, as Councillor Newsome said, education, the ELP has demonstrated some real, both in terms of an ambition and a commitment to drive through some of these changes going forward. They do recognise that there's a lot more to do, and I think working with and maybe some of the parents, having them as champions, and advocacy. So for those who are more confident and can see the benefits of that, really spreading the word.
Sorry, Councillor Newsome, do you want to say something, and then Councillor Haley will come back?
I was just going to dwell, and again, I've attended a few of the meetings with Rosalind, who's an excellent chair, and has been driving a lot of this stuff forward in schools. You know, for me, it seems like just not having those debates in schools is the hardest thing that we can do, because, you know, the kids have got the internet to go and find out about things. So if we're not prepared to have difficult conversations in school, we risk them going and seeking, like, with legitimate curiosity of things about the world that, you know, we wouldn't necessarily want them to go down that route. And I think, you know, issues over the last couple of years have kind of really highlighted that. And as a mother of children in our schools, you know, it is notable certainly the dialogue and the awareness of racist events and racist dialogue between kids, and the kind of language that gets used is really shocking. But there's equally, if we have teachers who don't feel confident to have balanced and measured conversations in that space, and so things don't get talked about, that seems to me an even more dangerous thing. So I think it is absolutely about doubling down on that conversation and supporting parents to feel empowered in that space. I can't think of a kind of more important imperative really for our schools, and it's great that you've now to see that benefit. And I suppose the real challenge is keeping that alive, because obviously you have a set of parents who are really engaged and involved, and they move on. The kids go to high school. How do we make sure that legacy is embedded in the school rather than dependent on a few really engaged and really proactive parents?
Okay, yeah, so Councillor Haley, you wanted to come back, yeah.
So Carol, you mentioned about Park, and I work closely with Park, so I know the work they do, and I'm behind it. But one of the, and Park, they will say the same thing, as one of the biggest issue I have as a Black educator myself is, yes, we have all these policies, we talk about how hard it is for Black children, but the problem is incidents are not dealt with in the same way. I'll give an example. The way we deal with a bully, when a bullying occurs in classroom or in a playground, the way we deal with it and the way we deal with a racial words against a Black child, whether it's a playground or in a school, is not dealt with in the same way. And I know this is bigger than the scrutiny that we're doing, but I just want to start something here in terms of what parents really want to know is, when will this racial equality in the schools that occurs for Black children, when will it be equally same as all those policies? You talked about difficult questions, Councillor Newsome, and you're right. Parents and teachers are not, especially teachers, are not equipped nowadays to have those difficult questions or different conversations with Black children. And maybe it's because of lack of awareness or lack of knowledge. But what Park and I and all the Black leadership and educators in Ealing are saying is, when will parents' voice will be truly listened to when they report incidents in schools, whether it's primary or secondary school, and when will that be taken seriously as the same way as bullying or any other issue or safeguarding issue occurs? Where will that be, the fairness and equality? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it is going somewhat beyond the scrutiny, but does anyone want to come back on that?
I think they're very important points and are reflected in the work of the Citizens Tribunal and the REC. And there is in the longer report to Cabinet, there is a bit more detail about Black Parent Forums and some of the funding that's gone out both into schools for training through ALP and into community groups. But we will also take your points back, Councillor Haley, because they're very important, and we will get some answers on those.
Councillor Mortaza.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for delay in declaring my conflict of interest. I am one of the providers in health in the borough. Now, this report, when it was published, when I read it, it was an eye-opener, and I asked myself what could be done to improve the situations, and I think I can share my experience, and this can be proven very effective and positive. That after the report came, we have a obligatory duty to form a patient participation group, which is called PPG. And looking at the diversity of the population which was registered with the surgeries, we recruited the patient participants, and luckily we managed to get a Black gentleman as a chair of the PPG, and we empowered them, and we discussed this report, and we said that, okay, we will be guided by you. What changes would you like to make? And it has become a very effective way of doing and combating some, not all, but some of the inequalities. Also, we developed a proper policy to combat this inequality in health, and that is available on the websites and for patients to read. I think this is one way of going forward, as Councillor Sharma asked the questions, how we can improve the situation. Thank you.
Not quite sure. There was more of a statement than a question, perhaps, but again, Councillor Newstead wants to come back. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many, and this is, and I don't want to diminish the ambition of the race, but you know, within Ealing, we know we have massively disparate health outcomes. You know, if you live at one end of the borough, you're likely to live significantly fewer years than if you're at the other. We know, not specifically to Ealing, but we know that we have far more instances of Black men dying. Prostate cancer, breast cancer outcomes are far worse. We know that there is absolutely embedded in our health systems overall absolute inequalities of outcomes, which when you look at it and you look at things like maternal health, can really only be rooted in racism. There's no other rational explanation. You can talk about different communities not accessing and not screening and all that sort of thing, but when you start looking at some of the outcomes that just are based on someone having a different experience in that maternity ward or in that in their treatment when they went and asked for help from the GP, there is no doubt that there's far more work to do. It's great that you've been able to achieve that, Councillor Mortaza. I mean, anything we can do that increases that participation, and is extremely valuable. And I would point to our community champions who are absolutely focused on and are part of communities that we know are not enjoying the same long healthy lives as other people. And those kinds of initiatives are making progress, but there's no doubt there's more work to be done in putting that pressure on our NHS. And in my brief experience in the role, and Councillor Taylor did this role some years ago, so he will, I'm sure, have sympathy with me. You know, you go and talk to the NHS and you try and become part of the partnerships and become part of the decision-making process. The NHS is exceptionally good at describing what the problem is. is exceptionally good at saying these are our inequalities, this is where we see different outcomes, this is the data, this is the things. Actually quite poor at changing the dial on some of that stuff. So I think that's where we as an authority is understanding our role, which is we are the people who understand our place. We're the people that represent our communities and the people. We have that absolute responsibility to work with the NHS to really focus on outcomes rather than what we endlessly do is describe the problem. Forgive me, doctor, I'm not being critical of you or of GPs in particular, but it's been quite an eye-opener in just how difficult it is to bring about real change in these large systems. And there are huge restructuring in the NHS initiative to bring things down to a much more community level. And while we wait to see what that will mean, it should bring things down to a more local level. So where you have patient participation groups, that should become ever more meaningful if our care providers and the entire network is closer to our communities and can really respond more effectively.
Yeah, so Councillor Mataza wanted to come back with
just a question. Last year, I think I raised a question of having the BCG vaccination given to the ethnic minority people because they are more prone to have tuberculosis. And at that point, it was noted that there was a lack of trained midwives and nurses. So this is one of the points where I think we need to address this, and I would like to have some sort of reassurance that the ethnic minorities which are more prone and susceptible to have tuberculosis, their kids should be vaccinated at birth with BCG rather than delay of 1 year. Thank you.
I can't speak on behalf of the National Health Service. I wish I could. I mean, certainly, my understanding. I mean, my children were born in Southall in Ealing Hospital. They were vaccinated at birth, and so I know there are efforts made to understand the specifics of local populations and to respond. But I can go back and take that if that's not the case now.
Great. So we've got Councillor Gordon, and I don't think I've seen any more hands. So yeah, right. Sorry, I wasn't sure whether you're anything up. So Councillor Raza, and is that Councillor Taylor as well? Yeah. Okay. Right. Great. So.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask some questions about the tribunal itself, and it's a real shame that Denise Charles isn't here or anybody else from the tribunal because it is their report, it is their work. It's not a council report. So it'd been what I want to ask is probably better coming from them, but you're here. I want to ask, did this work? Was the Citizens Tribunal the good model? I mean, it was touched on in the introductory comments, because obviously this is new, it's a very unyielding way of working, and it looks like we might be working more in this direction in other areas. And obviously the public conversation is more increasing use of citizens tribunals and similar. So did it work? Was the composition correct? Were there people missing from the tribunal? I mean, I don't know any of these, and a couple of the people vaguely, but were there skills missing? Were there individuals who could have been on the board to? And how can we use this experience and this model in other areas going forward? What are your views? I was going to ask a question about the NHS. I also want to ask your thoughts on the police, because it's in the report, you've mentioned in comments, pretty sluggish response from the police, as unfortunately we are experiencing in other areas. Can you make some comments, further comments on that? How we can get the police to take this sort of work seriously? Thanks.
That's the question I was going to ask. Sorry. Yeah, going on. Yes, please.
The million-dollar question: did it work? I suppose it depends who you ask in the Citizen Tribunal, but I would say, as a body that held the council to account, to a degree it worked, because the way I'll bring to, I think the composition we could do with more. I think initially we had 10 citizen tribunals, 6 priorities. These are people who worked full time, they had families. And for some of these subgroups, say for example education, there were a number of meetings, and they also went visits. They had police visits and across the various subgroups. And actually education was so dedicated, they went to visit schools. So definitely in terms of numbers, I think we could have had an increase in numbers. I'm just thinking of the feedback, because I did have a session with Denise recently in terms of thinking about the next steps. If I'm honest and candid, there is some cynicism amongst some of the tribunal members that didn't feel, both particularly the police and some of our colleagues across the departments, it was a tick box and they weren't really fully committed, and they didn't see evidence both in terms of them providing the information and actually turning up to meetings. So I think that's true. But in some areas, I would say there was evidence of it really working, of our colleagues really looking at the tribunal members and really relied on their input, their knowledge, and some of their guidance. So I think it's a 50-50, and that's all I can say. Yeah, so if I were to, I mean, there's lots of learning. If I were to start this again, definitely more, and take some time in terms of building the relationships among, because basically we've got 10 individuals from different backgrounds. In terms of the selection, we were specific in terms of the interview process that looked for people with some technical. So we had one guy who was a data whiz. You talked about data, so his constant challenges, where's the data? But we also looked at people across a range who had some education experience, who had worked. So from that point of view, I think that was good, but we needed more of it. But what we also needed, because it's about relationships, it's about relationship amongst the group, and it's also about the relationship with our colleagues and partners. So taking some time to build those relationships so that when tribunal members approach colleagues and said, do you mind, they didn't feel as if they were being attacked. For some people, and I think race is a very sensitive issue, and for some people, if you pose a question, where's the data on this? You can say, I'm sorry, I don't have it, but some people become very defensive. So I think there is a process of learning together that actually we're here to solve a problem of race inequality, and together we can fix it. But let's get to know each other. Let's be realistic, what's doable. And I think, yeah, so there's lots of really great learning. And in terms of the model, I definitely think it's a model that could be used, not just necessarily in race, but really thinking through what's the learning, what are some of the challenges, and how I think we know a lot now going into it, that we will do a better job.
I'll just, if it's all right, just to add to that. I think you're very astute, Councillor Gordon, to say actually that's a question for the Citizens Tribunal, and we will have a view, and we'll have 11 different views, I think, probably from the Citizens Tribunal, as we should have. I think one of the things that I've reflected is we need to do a lot of learning and change. So we set up a Citizens Tribunal, we recruited members, but then it feels as if we still ran things a little bit like a council project, with sort of work streams and recommendations. And actually, did the Citizens Tribunal have enough of their own agency to go where they wanted to look? Could they call in whatever they wanted and hold us to account for things beyond the list that we'd given? So I think that we have learned loads over the last 2 years about how we might respond if the Citizens Tribunal model was to be expanded or used for something else. So it's been loads of learning, and actually I think the best thing is the conversations are crunchy. So, we are getting into a space where people can talk honestly about what's going well and what's not going so well. So it has been very helpful for us.
Thank you. I mean, so really, actually, Councillor Gordon asked the questions I was going to ask. But yeah, just following up on one of those, in terms of the organisations like the police and some council departments as well that were seeing it as sort of more of a tick box exercise, not engaging as much. Is there anything that we could, really thinking ahead to recommendations, is there anything that we could suggest to try to improve the way that some partners and also internal organisations engage with the process? Yes, Councillor Newstead.
I think that absolutely hits the nail on the head. I mean, for those of, and many of us will have done, sat on OSC, I think it is, where we have the annual report from the police, we will know that every single year we'll look at the stop and search the figures, and every single year we'll go, this has got to change, and every single year they'll go, and then they'll come back in a year, right? I mean, I don't necessarily want to just throw mud at the police, but we are all experienced in how well organisations and systems are at kind of and then carrying on. That's not to say, and it may be the case, that the Met's doing all sorts of good work, or feels it's doing all sorts of good work in terms of its new Met for London, and it feels that that's the direction of travel. I think we could make recommendations to the Met Police, frankly, till we're blue in the face, but does that actually change things? Where I think it is really interesting is what Amanda and Carol have touched on, is like that investment up front, and we didn't know what we know now, is we sort of set up all these people and then kind of raised the aspirations and the ambitions really high, rightly, as we did, and then we sort of got them to run the project for us. And you're like, actually, but that wasn't done in bad faith. That was done because you had this set of incredibly experienced, highly educated, really professional people, and you want it to be their citizens' tribunal. So I think we need to think exactly about those relationships. Certainly the expectations within the council. I can remember when I came in, I thought, maybe in my naivety, that that we would have council officers kind of rushing to show off their work that they were doing in the equality space, and in actual fact, it just became, not just because I don't want to devalue the work that did happen. There are lots of projects that happen. We know from Scrutiny there are lots of things that we do, and we sit and we have conversations, and that's really nice. But actually, the Commission felt different, and the Commission felt urgent, and the Commission felt like something really high profile that we committed to. And that's not to say we haven't achieved an awful lot, but how do you, and this is a kind of theoretical question, I suppose, how do you take that energy and that urgency, and how do you sort of bureaucratise it in a way that allows for things to get done, but doesn't then sort of suck all the air out of it? I mean, that's a challenge for all of us as leaders and as local authorities and people. How do you retain that enthusiasm and autonomy of those people who've committed their time, while not kind of making it a council project? We didn't want it to be a council project. We wanted it to have its own energy and life. But the reality is, minutes need taking, and actions need noting, and agendas need to be met. So it's finding that balance between how we genuinely push through change and retain that urgency, while kind of having some of those support mechanisms around the people that have committed their time. Relationships is everything, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Raza.
A bit like you, quite a lot of my questions have already been raised. So, I mean, what I'm seeing is that the REC and the Citizens Tribunal was the first time that Ealing as a whole tried a cultural shift. It was something that hadn't been done before, and the fact that we've got this far, I feel we should congratulate everybody, and we should give ourselves a pat on the back, because this was a completely different way of doing things. And of course, people felt that it was being critical or judgmental of their particular departments or their particular organisations the minute that we asked for data that might not be lovely data. We were so ingrained in actually having sort of lovely productions of this is what we've got right, because that's what we have been trained to do. So we're literally sort of implementing a cultural change. And last time we heard about the Your Voice, Your Town, that I would see as a natural progression from what we learned from these projects. So it will take time. I mean, people are just, residents are just getting their heads around the fact that they are being asked questions or input or something, that whatever they have to say is important and will be taken into account. And I think that's a very weird feeling for people, because they're used to just pushing back against the council or pushing back against the police and don't really see them as equal partners. So I think this sort of equality at that level is just sort of bedding in, and so it is very weird, and you often come across, I do on my patch, where you sort of say, hey, we'd like to hear from you, and they'd be like, okay, we don't like this and we don't like that, and the council's bad at this, but then when they sit down and say, well, actually, we do like the way that you do this, and the fact that you're asking us is a positive move. So on that, I'd like to say that that's a good thing. But with the police, having worked closely with the police for a long time now, yes, their shutters are down. They're still in that space where they don't see us as equal partners almost. It's kind of like defending everything that they've got going on. So what we've done in Greenford is we've started at the sort of ward panel level, where we've tried to embed people there from different communities and made a real sort of attempt at trying to have a wider spread of people. Because what used to happen was 4 or 5 people from the same street in the same part of the ward used to come to ward panel. They would have a go at the police about various things. Everybody would go home. Then they'd have a go at the council. Everybody would go home, and that would be it. So what we've seen changing is that when you bring in people from different parts of the ward, so it's not geographically in one spot, and made a real conscious effort to get people from the minority communities to come forward, it's changing. So I'm not going to say it's going to happen overnight, but I think we do need to tap those little ward level things where we have people from perhaps the tribunal or from that could be a very fertile ground for you to recruit people as well into the tribunal. But I think when we're looking at borough-wide, it's very daunting. So I'd like to see more action sort of ward level to see what's happening. And that in itself is another inequality, because in Greenford, Northolt and Perivale, we have a bigger black hole of where people aren't perhaps getting as much of a service as they should from us or from other organisations. So I just wanted to throw that in. And thanks.
Right. So who's like Amanda? I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose that wider point about relationships. So one of the things I was going to say in an answer to another question, but I didn't, was that we can see in the recommendations from the REC that where we've had more success and more impact and gone further, they're really in places where people are already skilled in relationships and partnerships and understand the value of that. So education and health, so people who are already working in that way, and then we push those relationships a bit further. And where we see less traction are perhaps in more transactional services and people who the police have not been in that relational space, but their Met plan clearly says they need to move into that. And I think you're talking about very individual relationships at a very local level are indeed where we're trying to build out from in lots of our work. And I think that definite change from transactional to relationship is really important in all this work. And that cultural shift is hard, but we are moving in lots of places. So thank you for noting that. How did you want?
Yeah, it was your point actually. You mentioned that what can we do about the police? I didn't quite. I think actually it takes leadership, because at the leadership level within the police, they didn't particularly, I don't think, took the tribunal seriously, nor some of the demands quite seriously, and they had a lot to be fair on them. I'm trying to be totally objective. There was a lot of change in their management. So there was like 6 or 7 months and somebody left. And so we were constantly waiting, and somebody would turn up and say, oh, what's this all about? We'd have to start again. But I think if there was within the whoever was the top person, this was, this is something you have to do irrespective of who's in post. So I think it wasn't taken seriously. And reflecting on the conversations I've had with tribunal members, they've echoed the same thing, that they didn't think that the police took some of those the priorities and the actions they committed to particularly seriously. So there is something there about going back to say, why did you sign up to this if you're unable to deliver it? And if you're not, then because they kept buffing us back. So we've got various national action plans that we're delivering against, and we can't do this as well.
Anyone want to add anything?
Yeah, just to Councillor Raza's point about the and it's a salutary reminder, is that as councillors and as members of our communities, we do have that opportunity to be part of that change at a very local level. And certainly in Hemel Broadway, we've had a very similar, where it got down to discussions that were sort of about one street, and the more we've been able to try and actually they do listen to residents. They will respond, and if that's all that they're hearing, it gives a very, very skewed picture. And so we have similarly, perhaps with less success, and you try to bring in representatives from other communities and other geographic parts of the ward, and it does take time. I would say, yeah, I mean, the police are also going through their Casey review and they're systemic, being told again that they're systemically racist, misogynistic and homophobic and not accepting the findings. So, there's a wider context there that probably our little wreck in Ealing felt like a little fly buzzing at the corner of their consciousness. But I think it's right. And I do think that at leadership and the senior level, the council needs to set the expectations of our relationships. And obviously we're in a partnership with them. We rely on them hugely to do many things to keep our residents safe, but it is not unreasonable to expect that they work towards the wider equalities agenda that we have as a council and as an administration.
Right, so I've seen Councillor Taylor and Councillor Mohan, and then we'll have all had a bite of the cherry, and then we'll move to recommendations. So Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, it's going to sound a bit rambly now, what I'm going to say. Sorry, some of the questions. I suppose, I think the start, well, one thing I want to say is, picking up what Yoel was saying, is I was worried it would be slightly filtered with Denise not being here, but Carol, in fairness, has given an honest appraisal to that work. So thank you for that. I think before it started, some of the newer councillors weren't here, but I remember having discussions as councillors. This was during COVID time, wasn't it? I think, and I did say it was a kind of once in a generation opportunity to do this, which is why, I certainly support. There was skepticism amongst other councillors, but I felt it needed to go ahead, whichever format is going to continue, and I still believe that. And I know, it won't happen overnight. Going to focus on outcomes which will take time to deliver, because the perception will always be, it's not even now, maybe in 5 years' time, what difference does it make, or what difference has it made? I think there was a perfect example today in the Times about Ealing Hospital, the trust that covers it. There's a perception about Ealing Hospital, but actually they've got very good cancer rates, of diagnosis, but so it's doing quite well because it's just a change of the perception. So that takes time from issue about data, and people's sort of anecdotal perception of things. There's a question about timeline, what you think about future timelines. The other thing was about the use of equalities impact assessments. I mean, I don't know if all the cabinet papers have them now necessarily, and due respect, I'm not going to read 200 pages every time, because that's, I mean, having someone who's got to write them as well in another place. It's the thing about actually what goes in, and because it's easy to say we haven't got the data, therefore we don't know the impact, because a lot of that's about what you're going to mitigate against, because obviously policies go ahead, but what's, unintended consequences. So how we're using those. There was the issue about member engagement, I think, and this is probably a discussion point, because there's bits in there about community engagement and councillors not getting engaged as well. And I feel slightly disappointed, having said what I said at the beginning, that I'm not saying I should be part of it, but I'm in front of that, but no one's actually come back to me or some of my colleagues to say, and hear our views. You've heard from Councillor Haley tonight representing some concerns about areas, and we're not asked about that. So there suddenly became, I felt, a bit of a disconnect with us who would be the champions of this. Ultimately, having agreed at the start politically, and then it's shunted away somewhere else, and members, we work in very different ways in our own community, whether it's geographically or whether it's culturally, and we're not really asked as well, and how do we get involved? Because you mentioned community champions, but councillors are community champions as well. And it's my worry is going back to an earlier point around the models. And this is probably not a discussion now, but you talk about citizens' juries, which has been about 25 years been talked about. That is, where is that role of councillors in that as well? I also think about the recent debate about assisted suicide in Parliament, you know, discussion about should they've had something around that, but actually give it to
I think we're
representatives.
going.
No,
yeah.
I'm not going down there, but I'm just at that point. Assisted dying, sorry, sorry, you know, sorry, wrong one.
Well, if you draw your remarks to a close, we've had three or four points in there.
There are models. I'm not saying this is the wrong model, but it's one of the models. But I do value that role as councillors. There's 70 of us, you know, we do bring something to the table, not just those who are part of the executive. Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. So there's several different things to respond to there. I don't know who wants to jump in on any of them.
Is it worth you talking about impact assessments? That's your wheelhouse, and then I can talk about member engagement.
Yeah, so equality impact assessments, the answer is yes, they should be in cabinet reports. They're probably a variable quality, and part of that quality, as you rightly say, is about the data that's available to people. So some are making assumptions on data that we don't yet have. So I think that's why we're setting up lots more research capacity so we can get more of that data. And we are also reviewing the equality impact assessment as part of our cultures of evidence, because there is no point in doing them. There are a lot of time. There's no point in doing them if they're not good. And as you say, it's the mitigation that's the interesting thing, not the statement. So yeah, we have picked up that equality impact assessment, and we are working on that. And I've written something else here, which I can't read. Maybe I'll hand to you, Polly, while I try and read what I've written here.
I really agree with you, Councillor Taylor. I would like to. I think there could and should have been more engagement from cabinet in terms of the work of the tribunal, and there certainly should have been more work with our members. I think you're absolutely right, and a lot of the work around Your Voice, Your Town has been developing and understanding that role that we have as community leaders. And I think there was a disconnect there, and I think a lot of it was about how some of the relationships were drawn at the beginning. We let them go off into the wilderness and do their thing, and certainly, and I can only talk from when I got involved, which was last May. They were very keen to see more representation from us, and it was an absolute mistrick from the cabinet and leadership and the wider opportunities to engage all of us, actually. And that's certainly something we would need to do differently.
Good. Right. So yeah, that's right. Councillor Mohan,
Yeah,
and then we'll move on to recommendations.
Quick
Thanks.
one. In terms of effectiveness of the tribunal, I think despite very many challenges and limitations, they have done some really wonderful work, very encouraging report. In terms of actionable recommendations to advance the work of the tribunal, what sort of process is in place to see the sort of advancing work and to see the execution of the recommendations? So what will be the process?
Can I pick up and then perhaps pass over to you, Carol? I mean, the thing is, and I hope some of them are listening, it is very much, the Citizens Tribunal belongs to the Citizens Tribunal. So, and it is in our constitution that it will continue until they decide that there's no further use for it. I can't remember the specific words. I think we might have them in the report. And that is a really important, and while of course as politicians and as officers, we can have like opinions, and we can perhaps help guide that conversation. Ultimately, it's for Citizens Tribunal to decide the basis upon which they work, what they want to focus on, and how they want that to work in the future, which I know sounds a bit fuzzy, but it's really crucial. If you're handing power over to people with both lived experience and technical expertise in their areas, that we give them that autonomy. So we're sort of in that process of, and I'm sure Denise would add hugely to this, in that process of having sort of gone, oh, right, we've got that, extensive report done, we've done the impact report, we can, and actually, people can have a bit of a rest, but really people are going to have to think clearly and carefully about what their own commitment to what they want to do next, and also what kinds of areas that they want to see being tackled and how they want that to happen. So, you know, of course, we'll be part of that dialogue, and I, you know, would welcome as many voices into it. But ultimately, it's their decision to make, and they're having those conversations amongst themselves now. It's a really important principle. But I hope they want to carry on, and I hope that there can be there's so many areas in which we could expand the remit while retaining that focus. I think it could be a broader equalities focus. It could be leading into some of the work around the NHS and the health equalities work they're doing in North West London. There's lots of opportunities for really embedding the equalities work into everything we do at a council and being driven by them rather than expecting them to deliver it. And I would hope that many of them want to stay involved and be part of that journey of keeping our feet to the flame.
Yeah, Councillor Mohan, you wanted to come back briefly.
At the moment, sort of the members are doing voluntary work, and there is a recommendation that they should be paid because they invest a lot of time. So I think it's the council sort of response. So in terms of this recommendation, so what will be the process? Will the council kind of look into that recommendation?
Yeah, so I think as Councillor Newsab said, there is the Citizens Tribunal continuing to talk about the future and what they want to do and what they want to look at, but they have given us, and you'll see it on page 30 of the Cabinet report, which I think you're referring to, a set of recommendations that they want us to consider now. And we do have a process. I think your question was, what's the process for taking those forward? So we are taking each of those forward in different ways. And actually, the question about what we pay people, our communities who work with us, we've found that that's slightly different across different things. So some people will be paid, you know, a voucher for doing this thing, but nothing for doing that thing, or more volunteering here. So we need to have a policy across the piece to say, if we're moving into this new version of the council, working more closely with citizens and our communities, how do we make sure we value their time in the most appropriate way? So we are thinking of that in the wider piece. And will form probably part of our community charter work, and we're thinking about it there. And these individual recommendations, each of those will be taken up in discussion with the Citizens Tribunal. So we won't let anything fall through the cracks. Do you want to add anything to that, Carol?
Just to say, actually, so Denise, who's the chair, should have been here, is meeting with the rest of the members to go through the recommendations. One of the key challenges for them, because as I mentioned earlier, is they want more people recruited. So whether or not they all stay is dependent on whether or not we think about increasing the numbers, because it's been quite challenging for some of them, especially when they're in a few groups. And in terms of the issue of payment, when we initially recruited the group, we were quite explicit at the outset that this is a volunteer. And it's interesting that most people don't want to be paid. They're doing it they want to put something back in, and there are only one or two. But I'm not saying that we shouldn't pay, but I think they should be remunerated for their work, because they do absolutely do a hell of a lot of work.
Okay, so we're moving to recommendations. So I've captured a few possible ones, so I'll read them out and we'll see what you think. So one would be, and whether it's worth doing that, but a recommendation to the Met to engage more with the tribunal, take it more seriously. Seeing nodding, yes. And then the other police one was encouraging members to encourage members of their wards with from different ethnic groups and different geographical spaces in the wards to join the police ward panels. Yeah. Then we've got there was the public health thing. So that was around a recommendation to public health to look at inequalities in how they plan vaccination campaigns, vaccination process. Well, BCG was specific, wasn't it? Yeah, that. You don't think there needs to be recommendations? I think there's. Well, that's what I was saying, sort of vaccination campaigns more broadly rather than just BCG. I'm sorry, I haven't got, sorry. Yeah.
Just ask the doctor. I thought the PGC vaccination is given to all children that are born, to my understanding. I know you talked about the BAME community, but all my kids received the PGC vaccination, like constantly. But can you just elaborate more so I can know if we're going to recommend it or just a feedback?
So Anna Maria has helpfully mentioned that there's an item coming that relates to this, to the next health and adult social committee. So it wouldn't be appropriate for us to make a recommendation on it probably if it's coming. They're looking at that precise issue. Yep. Okay, great. Thanks. And then we've got recommendation to look warmly at the idea of citizens tribunals for other areas, you know, in covering different issues. I think certainly what we're hearing is very positive, and that would be useful. Yeah, explore the potential is what I said. Look warmly, but it wasn't very specific. But yeah, explore the potential of using them for other areas. Yeah, that's right. Clearly, other councils have used them for areas other than race. But yeah.
That the tribunal is supposed to be an independent body in its own right. So surely it's for them to tell us where they want to go rather than for us to tell them where to go.
Sorry. So what I was meaning was using the Citizens Tribunal model for something else. So it would be a different tribunal. You see what I mean? In other areas, that's right. Not to do with race. Yeah. Not to do with race. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Isn't that what your voice, your town is, sort of? With the town sort of grouping? I'm a bit concerned that we might sort of out-tribunal ourselves on everything. So if you've got hundreds of them, everybody is, as it is, people are quite confused about what's going on. And trying to sort of put that into some kind of context as a ward councillor has been a bit challenging, because people are like, well, why don't you just do it through, you're the council, we're the resident, and we come and talk to you about whatever we want to do. So having
yeah, I'm seeing Councillor Newsted and then Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I think perhaps something that sort of broadly recognises the value of citizen resident voice and welcomes the continuation of that as a residing principle of the work that we do at the council. You know, there's lots and lots of work we do in this space around co-production boards, particularly in adults and increasingly in children's space. So, you know, there are a huge number of different models of that. But I think we could certainly commit to the underlying principles of citizen voice and citizens involvement and citizens decision making within our delivery of our services and the management of our borough.
Okay, so I think Councillor Taylor wanted to come in, and I think Councillor Gordon as well. Yeah.
The thing about the commissions, I mean, when we did the first one back in our first term, when we did one on housing, and other boroughs have done anti-poverty commissions, is that actually they have quite a significant purpose and outcome in the rest of the council's term and policies. And if you're going to, like, say, do this area and that area, I think it's going to water down the impact. And this is the idea of this one as well, was the significance of it. And I think not overdo it is basically what I'm saying, you know.
Councillor Gordon.
I was thinking of another recommendation. So
right, okay. Well, on this one, so I mean, what's the consensus on this one? Do we not want to do this? A vote? Well, yeah. Sorry. Sorry.
In the Cabinet report that went in November, it was noted by Cabinet that Citizens Tribunal was a possible model for citizens holding us to account, and that model be examined. So I don't know if we want to. We would have to do something slightly different, I think, if it was another recommendation on top of that.
Right. Okay. So they're kind of almost already doing what we're. Yeah. So anyway, does that cover?
I think so. And sort of linked in my question is, we've learned some lessons. Some things have clearly worked very well. Some go in a different direction. To provide some of the lessons learned from this tribunal to future tribunals, as and when.
Right. Well, that's more helpful. That's yes. I think that's a more helpful, more specific recommendation. Are we all happy with that? Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. Great. And then I'm trying to read my note on this one. I can't read that one. I can't read that one. So yeah, okay. So assuming I can't read that, the final one that the final one that I had on my list was having recommending that there's some sort of policy around remuneration. So not necessarily saying they should all be paid, but I think really it's following up on what Carol was saying, that there ought to be some sort of clear policy on whether or not we pay in different circumstances. Yeah, good. Right. So yeah, Councillor Gordon, you had another one.
So I was just thinking. So we've scrutinised the report, work of the tribunal to an extent. Where does scrutiny go next with the ongoing work? Obviously, this depends on the composition of panels next year. Does it go to OSC? I don't know if this panel will exist in this format, but there should be, in a year's time, a process of reviewing what's happened since the report. So,
yeah,
how you can read that as a recommendation, I don't know.
That sounds a good recommendation. Yeah, I mean, we can be a bit vague about which part of scrutiny does it, but scrutiny, so a scrutiny, an appropriate scrutiny body should look again in a year. Yeah. Seeing both Councillor Newstead and Amanda. Yeah.
So I was just going to say, our outward-facing equalities work and our workforce equalities work sits within my sort of responsibilities as a strategic director. So you would be able to scrutinise the ongoing equalities work as part of this panel if it stayed in this existing form or whatever that changes into. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. But I think we can leave it vague because we're not sure whether it will stay in that form. Good. Great. So that was your recommendation, was it? Yeah. So are there any other recommendations? Oh yeah. Sorry.
I don't know if I can technically make a recommendation, but it was to Councillor Taylor's point. Really, it's about sort of leadership and member engagement. I guess something that captures that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah. So if we if we note there have been some. If we note that kind of best practice for the future would be to have more member engagement in any participative democracy processes. Yeah. Okay. Good. And actually, that was the one I couldn't read. Haha. Yes. Fine. Yeah. Member. Yeah. That was the one I couldn't read earlier. So that's perfect. Good. Any more? Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. Councillor Mohan. Yeah.
I wonder if we can make this recommendation. I was reading, many members felt that slow responses from council departments. Can we say that the council department should be encouraged to work with the tribunal if there is one again?
Well, and this tribunal continuing. Yeah. So I suppose that's right. So there's so there's just a sort of general point that all council departments should be encouraged to work closely with the tribunal and follow the best practice of the. So actually, what if we single out which were the best ones? Did you say?
Can I make a suggestion? I think it's a really valid and important recommendation, but as part of the process of the work, the recommendations, we are going back to our partners and departments to highlight, because they have been working quite closely with the Citizen Tribunal members and their action plan. There's some serious voids in their action plan because some of these actions haven't. So they will be addressing that. I mean, if this recommendation then reinforces that, then yes, but it's something that we are going back to our partners and a department because they haven't been engaged and they know who they are. And then the results speak for themselves when they haven't engaged.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worthwhile. Encouraging through different routes. Yeah. We're going to need to bring it to a close soon, but yeah, Councillor Newstead.
I just wonder if there's a catch-all about, because obviously you've got political leadership and then you have leadership within the organisation, and I don't know whether it's about us demanding high expectations of our leadership in all forms, and therefore that the time and space is made within the organisation to give the attention that the REC and the tribunal has deserved. I don't think that's too controversial, is it? high expectations of our leadership in all forms.
We need to also say something along the lines of, we want to foster more kind of a culture of not being so adversarial or perhaps defensive about what it is that we're doing in the interests of the work of the tribunal. We need a more open and, shall we say, fluid work between departments rather than sort of more siloed, which is what we're hearing seems to be happening, that people are very sort of sharp elbows rather than actually we need to improve this. A more open way of working so that we don't get all sort of judgy about each other.
Great. Okay. I think we can work something out of that. Brilliant. Okay. So thanks. Thanks very much to actually all the members for coming up with so many recommendations. But thanks to Carol, Amanda, and Councillor Newstub. So we're now moving to item 7, Borough Sanctuary. So yes, it's a change of portfolio holder. So apologies to the Helena, the Borough of Scrutiny consultant, and Larissa Pelham, who we've had waiting for quite a long time there. That it did go on for a bit longer, I thought.
Bit off. Sorry.
I'm all right. I'm fine. I'm quite warm. It's quite warm at this end, so you can go to that chair if you like. Yeah. So sorry. Let's just keep order. Yeah. So we're the Borough of Sanctuary. The report provides an overview of the work undertaken to date as part of the process for Ealing becoming a Borough of Sanctuary. Helena McGinty will be presenting the report along with Carol, who's still here for this, and I warmly welcome Larissa Pelham, who's Director of Ease Community, who is attending for this item, and Councillor Blarina Ashani is online for it, who's the Cabinet Member for Thriving Communities. So and just to mention, after the introduction and the questions to the report, there'll be an opportunity for those of us who attended the site visit to Ease to briefly share our reflections from that. And after that, I'll invite Larissa to add anything she wants to, an opportunity then to ask the panel to ask questions to her. So great. So if we start off with Helena, I think. Is it or Carol?
Actually, I'm conscious of time
Yeah.
because you gave us such great recommendations for the tribunal. So just to introduce Helena, who is going to tell you about the work she's been doing, but just a bit of context. Helena's background, she's worked with several boroughs in helping them to get their Borough of Sanctuary accreditation, and we made a commitment to become a Borough of Sanctuary. There's lots of good work going on amongst our volunteering community and faith sectors, really on the ground. And of course, you'll hear from Lissa about the great work they're doing at Ease, and many of you went to see the organisation. But there is also a lot of work going on within the council. So as part of becoming the Borough of Sanctuary, doing the strategy and getting the accreditation, Helena's been working really hard internally and externally in building those relationships and also pooling the organisations together to look at opportunities of working together, of co-production. So I'm going to stop here and let Helena talk to you about the work she's been doing, and then you'll hear from Lissa.
Thank you, Karen. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I do appreciate it. I'll be talking through the report that's already been circulated and just pulling out a few highlights from each heading. Hopefully you've had a chance to read it, but if not, I'm happy to give us some pointers. So firstly, we laid out the national picture, and we have various different migration streams throughout that are provided through government, but I think it's also important to note that not all of our sanctuary seeking residents are here on structured, funded government pathways. So we're trying to take quite a holistic view of this. So I think you can see from the figures that are mentioned, there is quite a disparity in the resources and funding that are made available depending on what pathway people arrive through. We can see in the number of people there's a decline in the number of people arriving through Homes for Ukraine. We can see that there is a kind of consistent and constant need to resettle refugees, mostly from Afghanistan, who are still waiting in third-party countries like Pakistan. The number of people claiming asylum nationally continues to increase. We had a spike in the number of people arriving from Hong Kong in 2019, and we can see that that has trailed off, but there's less data available for that. As mentioned, not everybody is on a funded government scheme, and our residents who are subject to the condition of no recourse to public funds. Nationally, we can see that there's actually been a plateau in the numbers of people in this group, but the cost to support them is increasing. I'm going to a little bit more about that. So we can say that the national trend is more or less reflected in Ealing, with asylum being a little bit more nuanced, and we can talk about those nuances. So for the Homes for Ukraine scheme, Ealing is the second highest council for welcoming people on the Homes for Ukraine scheme. It's the second highest in London. And we've seen some great results through the commissioning of the Ukraine project with EHCVS, and I think it shows how integration can be done really well when it's given the appropriate funding. We are the sixth highest in London for resettled refugees. We are the fifth highest in London for total number of asylum-seeking residents, and that currently represents 110% of the Fair Shares Agreement. If you might cast your mind back maybe about 18 months to when London councils agreed what would represent a fair number in each borough. We're the fourth highest in London for no recourse to public funds, but the data there is quite challenging for everybody to collect. So it depends what way you slice the data, but we are looking about average. I've kind of laid out the context, the need, and I think we should focus next on what we're going to do about that need and how we'll meet it. So as Carol mentioned, we committed to becoming a Borough of Sanctuary in 2023. That was a motion passed at full council, and it's also referenced in the council plan. The awards, for if anybody's not had a chance to read up on what a Borough of Sanctuary is, it's an award that's given to councils working in partnership with the voluntary community and faith sector to embed an environment of welcome for sanctuary-seeking residents. There's three main instruments to deliver this work. There's the sanctuary strategy, which we've circulated, the draft form. There is the Ealing Sanctuary Forum, and there will be the Sanctuary Oversight Board. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. The drafting of the sanctuary strategy and the application process has given us an opportunity to reflect of what services are already in place and a chance to identify efficiencies, economies of scale, and how we can streamline processes so we're achieving value for money for all of our residents, including our existing residents. I'm delighted to say that we submitted our first draft of the application on Wednesday, and we've received an initial appraisal, which was deemed to be excellent. So we will kind of proceed to the next stage, which will be the City of Sanctuary who award the accreditation, meeting with Ealing Sanctuary Forum, and they'll have the opportunity to discuss candidly and openly without the council in the room their views on partnership working and what they would like to see happen as a Borough of Sanctuary. And then we will hopefully progress to the final assessment at the end of March, and again hopefully we'll find out instantly if we've received accreditation or not. So in the sanctuary strategy, we have 40 commitments from all of the directorates. So it means that no matter where a sanctuary seeking resident enters the council, they will have a tailored offer of support, and all of our officers should be aware that this is a person-centred approach, and people have specific needs and we'll meet them where they are. There's a couple of examples in there. We're recruiting new staff in housing. There's a safer surgeries programme in public health, in adult social care, and some other teams will be looking at increasing the number of officers receiving trauma-informed training. There is always, as always, some housekeeping to do on the finances, just to make sure that we are drawing down all of the money available from central government, because all of this work is funded by central government. There is no drawdown from corporate budgets, and I think that's a really important point, especially when councillors are out and about on the doorstep and you may be asked some questions about where is this money coming from. So we can confidently say that this is coming from central government. In children's services, there's loads of commitments in there that are really innovative. And in strategy and change, we're hoping to recruit 3 new community workers. So it's really increasing that partnership working and making sure that officers are out in the borough working hand in hand with our BCFS, and making sure that we're connecting with residents directly. Speaking of finance, there's just another mention in there that the budget is 2.2 million for this strategy, which I think really demonstrates the commitment, and also that Ealing will now be kind of leading the way in London in what we hope to deliver. There is some big figures in there with examples and invest to save opportunities around NRPF, around legal casework procurement, and the opportunity for us to save. I won't go into the granular detail of it, but in the case of the unaccompanied asylum seeking child, which featured in a report from South London Refugee Association, the potential is for a saving of over 100,000 per unaccompanied asylum seeking child, of which Ealing has its floating number, but around about 33. So we're talking about a potential saving of 3.5 million just by procuring legal casework at £10,000 a year for 1 day a week. So there's huge opportunities. We also touched on the no recourse to public funds work, which if we have an officer who, included in other responsibilities, can support people who are subject to this condition to lift that. It takes people from being supported by the council to accessing benefits from DWP. And last financial year, Ealing spent at least 1.1 million. And again, it's challenging to capture that data, so we know that that is a minimum figure. On to partnership working. So in November 2024, we convened the first Ealing Sanctuary Forum, which is a huge landmark. This will be a space that's dedicated to our voluntary community and faith sector groups. It will be co-chaired with Councillor Hajani and also a rotating member of the voluntary sector. So as mentioned in a previous agenda item, we want to make sure we get it right about how we work and honour people's time. So there's a little bit further discussion around that to be had. The Ealing Sanctuary Forum will have a delivery plan that is appropriate, so it won't quite be the same as the action plan the council will be delivering, but the most important thing is the priorities are identified by the voluntary sector and the residents who participate in their services. We will also be creating a participation group, and we've not developed that idea too far intentionally because we want to hear from residents about how they would like to use that space and what the council's role might be in that. It's so important that we are being led by people with lived experience, and that's why in our Ealing Sanctuary Forum board, we've committed to at least 50% board members of residents with lived experience from the various migration pathways. So that's what we'll always be led by. I will round it up there. Last mention to Sanctuary Oversight Board, which will be the internal monitoring. And again, that will have representatives from all directorates to make sure that there are no blockages in this 3-year delivery plan, and making sure we're looking at things strategically, and again, identifying those synergies that represent value for money for residents. Thanks.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, are there any questions at this stage? So before we move on to the specifics, are there any questions on the questions for Helena, basically? Yeah, Councillor Taylor.
Just quickly, Helena. So the last penultimate point you made about people with lived experience. So, was that people who had arrived here as refugees and asylum seekers, or any migration potentially south the borough? That's what it was. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. We'll have representatives from each kind of migration cohort. So we would expect to see somebody who's a resettled refugee, perhaps from Syria or Afghanistan, someone from Homes for Ukraine, someone who's got experience of living in an asylum hotel, somebody who's got experience of no recourse to public funds, maybe a care experienced young person who's no longer in that situation. Just making, and it's not a set figure. We'd also welcome people from the Hong Kong community. It's really iterative work for us to be led by the BCFS and residents. So we'll continue to evolve on feedback.
Yeah, no more questions from the people. Yeah. So just could you say a bit more about what you're proposing in terms of? I think this is kind of leading into to ease really. What you're proposing in terms of embedding officers within those sorts of services provided by voluntary groups.
Sure. So again, we're looking to develop this in partnership with the voluntary sector to hear what would be useful to them. As it stands, we are currently, we will be recruiting 5 new staff, and there's also 2 kind of more policy roles that will be coming online. So the 5 staff will be a sanctuary coordinator, and the idea is that they'll be kind of dedicated to bridging, not a gap, but bringing people together between the voluntary sector and the council as a single point of contact. We've heard from our engagement over the last year that having a single point of contact in the council, a personal email, someone you have a phone number for would be massively useful. So we've listened and we've implemented that. There will be a dedicated housing officer, and I think the focus will include procurement of private rented accommodation, so that we're bringing down the pressure on temporary and emergency accommodation. We are also looking at 3 community workers, and I think that's the real potential for how we work in partnership. I think the idea is that they'll be largely based in the community, and things like attending the asylum hotels once a week, so we can start to shift our work to more preventative rather than people coming through the front door as homeless. So if we can set people up for success, help them set up bank accounts so that when they get their decision, they can start receiving their universal credit and hopefully have a smoother move on. And the community workers will also be working hand in hand with the community hubs and also the voluntary organisations that are providing drop-in sessions. That would be ideal for them to attend. So it is iterative. We want to hear what's most needed, but we have set aside budget to deliver some sort of function like that.
Great, thank you. Well, just to say, of course, it's fantastic that the initial draft appraisal was excellent. So you know, it's something I'm sure we're all very pleased to see that the process is going very well. We just so 3 of us went to the ease visit. I mean, certainly I was clearly, we could see how dedicated the volunteers were, and doing an absolutely fantastic job. But I think my main takeaways were, firstly, what a calm and comfortable space it is for all the service users. It is somewhere clearly that they're very comfortable and happy, and it's really important that services are delivered in that sort of environment. And then the second one was the feedback from the information desk, that a lot of the issues that are difficult to deal with would be much easier with better links into council services. So I think that's why it's so important to have those kind of single point of contact. So Councillor Sharon or Councillor Raza, do you want to add anything? Yeah, Councillor Sharon, yeah.
Hello, good evening. Nice to see you both again. And it was really wonderful to meet you and be shown around, and I learned a lot on the day. I've got, and also you're doing wonderful work, and I can see that there's a lot happening there, and you're really trying to address the issues and problems that are occurring, such as housing and health, education for children, and so on. Now, one of the questions I've got is, how does Ealing plan to engage sanctuary seekers in the decision-making process, which was something that we did talk about? So.
Well, yeah, so I was actually going to give Larissa a bit of a chance to say anything you wanted to before we went into questions,
yeah,
but
did
you want to? Is there anything you want to say, and then you can pick that up? Yeah. Oh, so if you put the mic up.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's amazing to have an opportunity to listen to you and to sort of support the Borough Sanctuary application. So we're obviously thrilled that it's going through. And I guess there are sort of probably 4 or 5 key points that I would say I think are important about the Borough Sanctuary application, and then specifically how some of that rolls out. And one is, and I haven't read all the documents, I've seen action plans and so on, but I don't know what the full documents are like, so this might be sort of too strong. But what is it that Ealing really wants to get out of it? What is it that Ealing wants to get from being a Borough of Sanctuary, and what is the service that it really wants to provide by being a Borough of Sanctuary? Because I think from that then it really stems about the sort of support services that you give. And I think there's some really interesting work you could be doing around user journeys, because the different types, and sorry, I should just take a step back and say, I'm only speaking on behalf, or not on behalf at all, I'm only speaking in reference to refugees in Ealing and those seeking asylum in Ealing. I'm not speaking about all the other groups in the Borough Sanctuary application. But just in terms of the user journeys, that different types of people, once they've got refugee status or as an asylum seeker in Ealing, whether it's a single mum or a young man or an elderly person or a person with a disability, they've all got very, very different needs. And I think it might be really important to do some user mapping, user journey mapping, to actually understand then what the different types of access that are needed for each of those, for different groups of people. But maybe that's obvious. But so yeah, one thing was just sort of about the vision and what Ealing wants to get out of it. And then, I mean, Helene has already talked about the whole of person approach, but I can't emphasize that enough. It is so critical. It is clearly Ealing has its statutory duty to do towards either people seeking asylum and refugees, particularly refugees when they get their status and they're looking for accommodation. And it's obviously under intense pressure, and I totally understand and that. And it is incredibly hard when you get families that have moved around constantly anyway. You finally got a child settled in a school, and we're now getting schools of sanctuary. And then because of the need, because they're a priority need, they are a family, they have to be housed somewhere, they then get ripped away and then sent across to the other side of the country or somewhere, and that complete dislocation of community when they've just started to build up community, I think is so detrimental. And I think there's a real importance in the council thinking that through, not just having one point of contact when, as you're saying, but how do you really link up those different services? How do you ensure that the SEN team and the education team are talking to the housing team? Because I think there might be some creative solutions with the community as well, not just sort of putting all the burden on the council. And then just 2 more points. Just one is around mental health. That's coming back to us as a critical challenge that people are facing. So we're currently doing some research with LSE students, and they are looking at what the needs are for people, how people are feeling about being in Ealing as well. And the top need that is coming back is in terms of mental health needs. And that's where sort of civil society and the community groups are so important as well. I mean, so it's not just about thinking about the link to services, but then how you have the social support and the network building and the, building up your social networks as well. And I think that all needs to be interlinked. And I've already sort of said about civil society and the importance of that. Naturally, I'd be saying that. But I would just say in terms of, I suppose naturally I'd be saying there isn't enough funding going towards civil society. I mean, you can take that as a given. Of course, I'll say that. But I would also just say, I think it's important that Ealing looks at how it and then how it gives out those grants. Is it always about giving it to a bigger organisation that is subcontracting to a smaller organisation? Because I'm not sure there's always been value for money when that happens. I think we're finding that we're a subcontractee, and we're finding that actually we're at risk of being our grant being our funding being stopped, because the overall project is not necessarily performing well enough, which means the funding will get cut from us, whereas very, very clear that we are putting in, we're obviously, we know that we're delivering on the grant, but actually the overall grant isn't. And that's where, so I would just say, I think there are different models to look at in terms of how funding might go out to community groups. So yeah, I think that's probably it, but I think we're faced with what we're really seeing is to have that connection with the council, and it's not, as I say, it's not just about Ealing Council providing services and are people getting access to services. That whole sort of network, that community approach is critically important too. And I think around the community hubs, I think there's really interesting work that can go on there. My one word of caution is at the moment they're focused solely on digital applications. And there is a lot more in terms of the kind of world about, focused on digital applications within Ealing to Ealing Council. And people are facing, you've already alluded to, needing to do universal credit applications, get bank accounts and so on. There's a lot more in the application kind of sphere than just digital applications to Ealing Council. So in terms of thinking about community hubs, I think that would need to be thought through as well. But certainly the applications is one of the big issues for refugees and asylum seekers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Haley had a question.
Thank you so much, Helena, and Lisa, it's good to see you again. My question to you, Helena, is just regarding the housing situation, and you said you'll be recruiting housing officer. So I have been working with asylum seekers myself. I've been supporting 6 families that come from Sudan and Afghanistan and Syria. And one of the issues as a councillor, I must admit, it was dealing with the housing situation. I found some families standing in the council late at night, 7 o'clock with children. Some, you mentioned mental health, some had small children with SEND and disability. To be honest with you, I did not know how to live in that situation. Thinking about office hours and housing officers are not around. So in terms of that, I know that the asylum seekers, one of the officers mentioned that they didn't have a grant from the Home Office late at night, so we'd never have this situation again. How are these officers that we're about to create for Ealing, how they're going to be supporting these families in that dilemmas? And are they going to be allocated just for the specific family, or these families are constantly going to have case officers change from day to day, where they have no emails being sent back, no telephone communication, and they have nowhere to go? And bear in mind, we are asking these families to stay in around Ealing Council for the whole day. And I'll give you a specific time that these families have been dealing with, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And you know that after 5 p.m, our day officers are gone. And so now we start in the emergency and you have to do self-referral. Please bear in mind that these families don't speak English. They don't know how our system works. They've been left and been dropped in front of the council, nowhere to go. If I had not been there, they wouldn't have been there for the entire night. And then they came back the next day. And I'm talking about these families are coming back every single day for 12 hours, taking 1 hour break to go use a toilet in Ealing shopping centre, and then coming back to do a night shift. Some of these families don't get home until like 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning if our referrals do find them property. Another thing is what we have an issue is these families who just arrived in the country and to get support from us, we are asking them to go to the police station. And I know that we have to safeguard them. I get that. And I know that we have to look after them. But bear in mind, some of these families are escaping from certain horrific situations. And for us to tell them to go to the police station, it's like us telling you're a criminal, you're going to be arrested. So that's already starting, it's not a way to be welcome to a country. And that's already starting a negative impact. So how are we going to be dealing with that moving forward? And thank you so much, Helena.
Yeah, so Amanda, and oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, I didn't see your hand up there. Yes.
Should I come in on that?
Yes, please do. Please do. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for bringing this to the committee. I just want to say that I'm really proud of all the work that's been happening. I think in the comments from the draft paper submitted, they noted the excellent work that we're doing along with our VCS partners. So really proud of those strong links. Councillor Haley, I think to your point, I think Helena can then go maybe into some detail, but I think to your point, I think the purpose of the Borough of Sanctuary is really to pinpoint all the services that are already happening, and there are so many, but a lot of the times they're working in silos, and I think this is where there are missed opportunities. And I think through this work, we've really been able to sort of see how we could bring the services together in a more streamlined way so that they're more effective and efficient. And I think exactly to the point you talk about, we will be having those contact points, where we can raise these issues, and then, those contact points internally will be far better connected. And through some of the mechanisms that Helena talked about, the ESF and some of the other mechanisms, I think we'll be able to pick up some of the issues more quickly and really focus on them. So, I mean, fundamentally, this piece of work is about improving the services for sanctuary seekers. And so I think that's a really important point about our commitment to doing that for asylum seekers or for sanctuary seekers across the borough. Yeah, thank you, Helena.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't know, Amanda, were you wanting to come back on the? No, you were just making sure I didn't miss the portfolio holder. Yeah. So, is anyone going to respond on the specifics Councillor Haley was coming up with? Yeah, that's right. So in terms of, particularly in terms of people having to kind of wait for 7 AM to 7 PM today.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that, Councillor Haley. I think we're very lucky to have councillors that care so much and have experience of supporting people. It brings a lot of context to the work, so thank you. There is a few things that kind of Lissa touched on as well, so I've taken a few notes. Let me know if I don't answer any questions. I think around the out of borough placements, and this ties into a few of the other points, what this strategy will do hopefully is focus more on prevention. So we're seeing less of these 6:30 on a Friday presentations and there's nobody around. So hopefully the numbers brought down by that. Around the housing officer, they will be dedicated to supporting sanctuary seeking residents. They will also be that email that you contact and should expect a response from. And hopefully they'll have more bandwidth than our housing officers who are serving other residents, and we know that housing have got such a challenge on their hands. It's not through lack of trying, certainly, but hopefully this dedicated housing officer will have a bit more bandwidth. And I think part of that prevention work is around procurement. As I mentioned initially, that if we can focus on procuring private rented accommodation, whether it's for asylum-seeking residents who have just left a hotel, whether it's for our Syrians and Afghans that you have experience of supporting, if we can reduce the pressure on general temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation, then everybody in the borough benefits from that. I think as well that procurement piece helps with the out of borough placements. It's obviously very traumatising, especially for sanctuary seeking residents who've got this experience of having to leave community and connection. So we want to avoid that, we want to prevent that. The referral to the police, I wouldn't like to speak out of turn or on behalf of anybody in children's services. I totally recognise that situation, and there was a review and nationally, and that was found to be the best solution. I think there can be questions asked of that, but that is the current safeguarding solution. I think what we can do is build around that support network, so that we do have dedicated officers within the council. We can introduce those processes, and I think it was mentioned about silo working, which I know is common to all local government by its nature, but the introduction of the two roles that will sit in strategy and change, of a senior kind of policy officer and also another support officer, I think that will help break down some of that siloed working and bring it together, so we'll know exactly who in Children's would be responsible, or exactly the housing process, to make sure that we don't see scenes like that, because we know how distressing it can be for families.
Thank you. So Councillor Gordon, question.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two elements to what I want to ask. I want to ask a question which is much more broader and really go very political, and then be micro. So first question, which is local: what happens if the application's unsuccessful? Does it change services? What are the implications for us as a borough? And then I'd like to ask some comments, and I don't know who's going to answer it, but everyone might have a view. How does this work in the broader political context? You know, we as a council, we went for this in 2023, Conservative government with a Rwanda policy, sticking people on boats offshore. That's been abandoned, but we don't hear very much about what's happening instead on a national picture. How does that impact on our work? And also there is the politics of the country at the moment, very, very hostile to the work that you're doing. The summer riots were indicative, supported by Daily Mail and the rest of it. Conservative Party and Reform actively hostile to the asylum work that you're all doing. Can you talk to that, please?
Probably all got a view on that.
Right, I think sorry for the yes. I think for the political bit, I think we should go to the cabinet member first.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're right, Councillor Gordon. Obviously, we are in a political climate that scapegoats sanctuary seekers, and we can all feel that and sense that sometimes. We do have a change in government, and there are changes that they're proposing, sort of, or just one example is about potentially passing on the housing responsibility to councils. So there are all these constant changes, and I think Elena touched on it at the beginning. There are wider sort of changes to the way we've dealt with sanctuary seekers, and actually the ebbs and flows in the way they've arrived to the country. I think more recently we've seen a rise in asylum seekers. I think fundamentally we made this commitment to producing this work because I think we recognise as a council how vital it is to support these communities, which is some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And I think that's a political commitment that we've made, I think. But beyond that, this work actually really streamlines sort of the work that we're already doing. It saves us money at the same time as providing better services for the sanctuary seekers. So I think we've got a really important story to tell about our moral commitment. That's right, and and I think we committed to that as an administration, and that's what this work is really about. But also we've got a sort of a can do better sort of attitude around the services that we're providing, and I think the Home Office provides the funding for this, and it's up to us to really think about how we're working with our voluntary sector to provide the best service possible for sanctuary seekers. But I do take your point on the political level, but I think we've got to be strong on standing up for the most vulnerable in our society and making sure that we are seen and to be taking that action, to be strong against some of the voices that we've heard in recent years, because we won't stand for that, and actually we always want to do better for the most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you, Councillor Shani. Did any of the officers want to respond on that as well, or not? Yeah.
Thanks for that, and thanks, Councillor Hajani. So on the kind of procedural of what happens, so the landmarks in the process mean that you're very unlikely to proceed to a final assessment if it's not looking very good. So we've had that initial appraisal, which I mentioned has gone very well. Just to put it in context, I've worked on 4 of these applications and I've been part of the assessment of 4 or 5, and you can usually expect to see maybe a dozen recommendations, and if things aren't going too great, maybe a requirement. And I think we had about 4 recommendations. So it's actually one of the strongest appraisals I've seen in London. The next part will be City of Sanctuary meeting with Ealing Sanctuary Forum for that candid chat. And there'll be another kind of decision at that point, should we progress to the next stage of the final assessment. So it would be very unlikely something would have to go quite dramatically wrong. But never say never, we're definitely not complacent. And we really hope to demonstrate all of the work that's been happening with the voluntary sector, with the council, and really bring it to life. The application itself is quite a simple Word doc, so we are really excited to actually have the opportunity at the final assessment to bring it all to life.
Great, thanks. Councillor Rasa.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that my trip to Ease was actually a brilliant, very insightful day out. And I tried to stay there for the whole time that you were running. We're very, very lucky to have a voluntary sector organisation like yourselves. So I just wanted to say thank you for putting up with me asking all those questions, and I was asking quite a few. But to sort of see a space which is safe and people feel that they have trust and that they have people who can actually help. And what I saw in copious amounts was humanity, where people were sort of dealt with in a very lovely sort of wraparound way, even though they were coming from lots of different sort of angles. You had some people who were quite agitated and they wanted an answer straight away. So there was one gentleman who kept, someone had pointed out that I was a councillor, so he kept asking whether he could have a gym pass. And you could see that it was very human, that of course he wanted a gym pass. He was a young man, he had lots of energy, and those are the sorts of things that we should be able to do quite easily. Also, your help desk upstairs, fantastic. The fact that people actually sit down and do the whole life admin with you and hold your hand through that process, which is really daunting when we don't have like language skills and people from all over, really, because we weren't just dealing with one cohort. There was a lovely lady I spoke to who really appreciated the English classes and how was really keen to sit and have a chat with me because she was trying out her English. So fantastic, really, really good work. My concerns are that you're a brilliant outfit in Acton, and where's the brilliant outfit in Greenford, where we also have a large cohort of people coming from outside with seeking asylum or refugee status. So yes, we do have lots of little families who are supporting each other. There's a lot of work, but I don't see anything on the scale of what's going on in Acton. So my slight concern is that it's lovely that you're doing your work. How do we get that equal service, if you like, across the borough and make sure that people who end up in Greenford have a similar experience to what you have in Acton? That's, but yeah, the main question, if you like. But also that how are we incorporating those little family groups who are helping each other? Because in Greenford we have a large cohort of Ukrainians and also quite a large cohort of people who've come from Hong Kong. So they're very niche, which is why the community has sort of taken them in and they're working with that. So we don't want communities who might be, say, below the radar to get lost. And how do we bring them into this amazing stuff that we're doing? Thank you.
Larissa, did you want to come back on any of those? Yes.
Just a quick response, because I think it can be hard to, these things can start organically and it's very, very grassroots, bottom up. And that's something that's kind of probably the beauty of it, right? It hasn't been imposed in some way. So I think it'd be amazing to see this replicated, and it probably is possible, but I'm not saying it's easy. One thing I would say about Ease is we are there for the whole of Ealing, and we will pay £5 to support people's transport for them to get to us. So we are certainly not, although we are based in Acton, and that was based around where there was asylum accommodation and where a kind church agreed to host us, a kind vicar, I should say. We are there for the whole of the borough, but I think it can be quite a challenge. But I do think that as you're saying, there's bringing together of groups and networks is really important. And just to say, I mean, thank you for thanking all our volunteers, because their work is staggering. We're entirely volunteer run. Over nearly 7,000 hours of volunteer time in 2024 went into making these happen. So, and we've seen, since we started 3 years ago, we've seen, I think, over 1,700 refugees and asylum seekers come through our doors. So, you know, and so it is quite phenomenal, and there is a real energy and need for that, and people like coming there. And we did last July, we did do a joint event with Carol's team, which was really successful, but it was really interesting. People said they didn't want to come to the council for the event. They wanted it to be somewhere where they felt safe and comfortable. So just going back to your point about people feeling embraced and feeling safe, it's, you know, coming to the council can be quite intimidating, and people don't necessarily know whether you're government or not, you know, they don't really understand what the council is. And I think there is something to be said for going out into the community and making it very community focused, which I think the application definitely is. So that's nice to see. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, so Councillor Taylor had a question.
Yeah, a couple of points. Sorry, Lisa, I couldn't make it last week, but I've been there enough times already. So, you know, I do obviously recognise the work that that they do, and I think just to touch on Councillor Shani's point, which is the reason I chose them as one of the charities was literally people who were destitute, who got nothing, you know, and that's why, and the hard work of the volunteers, and that's where it deserved the recognition that I sort of gave it. Two things I wanted to say. One is about communication, picking up on Councillor Gordon's point. It's getting it right. You know, it's not so much the money. I don't care if it came from our coffers of government, quite frankly. It's about that money that's coming. But that discourse out there that gets from people saying, well, you're going to spend this money on asylum seekers and refugees. And I think just getting the narrative right and saying how it's been spent and perhaps what people's entitlements are as well. I think this can be, I mean, even the council sometimes don't know the rules in terms of what people can get and can't get as well. But I think a briefing paper, but also for external comms, let's just make sure we get it right, I think. And I suppose the other thing is once we've got this, is thinking about EASE and maybe other organisations is the expectations of potential asylum seekers, thinking, okay, we're the Borough Sanctuary, we've got our award for this and that. Does it mean for the people who are seeking asylum as well? I mean, the danger raised expectations. I always think about the single men that are left out because they've got to leave accommodation, you know, so it's getting that balance right as well.
Who wants to respond? Carol?
Yeah, I'm just going to, that's a really good point, and it's raised time and time again. And I think as we go forward with this, you're not hit the nail on the head in terms of the comms, because we know out there, and you're going to be knocking on doors, people say, you know, there's a cost of living crisis, why are you spending all this money? So the narrative of, and I think we need to show the benefits. So it's sanctuary seekers, asylum seekers contribute so much to the local economy, and that message isn't told enough to look at the benefits. I went to an event where I saw there was a guy, I can't remember from which country, I think Afghanistan, started his own business, a restaurant, and he's employing more people. So I think those are the type of stories that we need to promote to show that actually there's the humanitarian side, but there's also the economic side. So it's not a drain on it's actually a benefit. And I think that's, yeah, something we're aware of, and that's something we have to do quite strongly in terms of the comms.
No, you're absolutely right. Positive ones. I know. I can't remember the guy. It's the bookseller from Cabal, isn't it? Who's well known. But actually, when I sort of took EASE and Apple to my temple in Greenford, it was trying to relate to people who actually came as Uganda refugees as well, and it's that kind of connection there as well about people, getting them to think about their journeys, how they came. Obviously, that was a different generation ago, but it's getting people to think about their perception of what you know, counters some of the negative.
Can I just add a quick point on that? Sorry, just because I think it is a really vital one. I mean, if I look at the people that come to see us, we have got, you know, one guy who I was speaking to this morning. He is an engineer, Afghan engineer. He's now got his leave to remain here, but he is now a project director at the British Museum. When I bike through the Mount in Acton on the way to the drop-in, there's a guy there who used to come to our drop-in, and he's now a stall holder at in the market in Acton. Yes, you know about the bookseller Kabul who was here. But there are so many people that are really contributing. You know, one guy, and I don't know whether he's now been deported, but he was a taxpayer in this country. He was a care worker. How the heck we could possibly have thrown him out of this country, I don't know. But the point is, people really the one constant feedback that we get from homeless teams, from homeless charities and Thames Reach and St Mungo's and so on, is that the refugee community are really easy to work with because they want to pay their rent. They're not gonna, the one thing they're not gonna do is screw up. And so this is actually a really stable, really, you know, stable and reliable community. And I think there's a big story to tell. And if we could give out some of these stories around what people are now doing and how, you know, they are contributing to society, and everybody wants to volunteer. You can, I mean, everybody that comes to the drop-in, they want to volunteer with us. They want to volunteer with other organisations in the borough because they know that's really important for them, for their well-being, for multiple reasons. So there is such a sense of needing and wanting to give back and build their lives and contribute to society. And I think we know from research internationally that migrant communities are an economic benefit to society. They're not an economic drain, as you've already said. I mean, yeah, the data's there.
Great. So I just wanted to come back on one of the things, Larissa, you said earlier on about subcontracting. So voluntary organisations basically sort of subcontracting services to each other. And I wondered, you know, whether there's anything we can do to change that. Really, sort of looking at Amanda and the other officers. Yeah.
So yes, I think last time when we came, the scrutiny panel looked at our VCS grants giving, and we had our 4-year programme, which we're in the process of reviewing. I think we're going into year 3, and also our small grants, and definitely looking at how we do that in the most effective way. So it's really important to hear good feedback about how things happen. It's sometimes hard when we see a consortium bid for things. We assume that's always better because people think a partnership is stronger than individual parts, but sometimes it's the only way to access the money. And I think we just have to be more aware of that, as we discussed before. So definitely that's something that I've noted down to take away.
Good. Okay, well, I think moving to recommendations. So I think one would be around, well, the last one that came up was around if we could recommend to Marcoms, I suppose, to promote positive stories of, you know, refugees that have come here and contributing to Ealing society. There's recommendation to housing to be aware when looking into, you know, outer borough and so on, that although your service users may not have a local connection in the traditional sense, there's mutual support communities. So there are those you know, mutual support communities that build up and which can be torn apart if people are sent to the other end of the country. I mean, obviously it's difficult because there's a housing crisis, but well, it could, but that's one of the points. Yeah, one of the points that came up though is that the funds they have are so tiny that it can be really hard to travel even from Hounslow. You know, it's difficult. Oh yeah, so is it worth having a recommendation to lobby government about the police, the reporting to the police station thing, because I can certainly see that seems really inappropriate. I mean,
especially for kids, I think in one case there was kids under the age of 5, and the out of hours were just saying they were outside Percival House and they were being asked to go to Acton because that's the only police station. And they would have had to stay there all night until they were picked up in the morning. As it happened, they weren't picked up in the morning, they were picked up in the evening. So would that have meant that they were sitting in the police station for literally the whole day? Because that's what happened. It's not ideal at all. There should be a better way to have somewhere where they can wait. And in this particular case, somewhere where they can use the toilet. When you've got 2 kids under the age of 5 trying to wait all day out in the cold, they do need the toilet.
Yeah,
I just want to come back on the housing recommendation. I'm not so much worried about out of borough. I think my question was based on just housing alone, and how the officers. To me, it sounded like when I was referring these families, that housing officers or the referral out of hours were not aware how to deal with the situation. So it would be more nice if we could awareness, and so they can, refer the families into the right accommodation, and the time frame as well. But I think the time frame was, once you put a referral for the family, it takes up to 3 to 6 hours of waiting. And Helen, you're shaking your head. I think you definitely agree with me on that. And I think it's fine that I know they have to wait, but where are they going to wait? Where are they going to wait? And that was the concern I had for these families and these children. Thank you.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's a slightly separate point, but that's sort of having a more humane process for when families have to wait in those circumstances. Yeah, and then we've done that. That's all I had. Did anyone else have any recommendations? Oh, sorry.
Go back to the recommendation about the children and the police station.
So yeah, well, so the first one, I think it was a couple of things. The first one that I suggested was that we lobby government to change because I think I think you said that is actually a government decision, that it's the most appropriate thing is with children to report to the police station in those circumstances, which it seems bonkers. So I think lobbying government to review that. And what was it? Yours was more about.
Sorry, I'll just correct for your minutes. I think the government policy is the asylum seekers need to report to police station for verification of ID. I think that's what it said when I read up. I wanted to find more about it, so that's what we have to put on the minutes. Yeah. And housing when you vote it.
Somewhere suitable for people to wait. So if you've got a family group with kids, it sort of ties in with what we were saying about police stations, that there ought to be somewhere which can accommodate families with children whilst they wait.
Any more? I'm sorry, Councillor Taylor. Yeah.
Yeah, just to keep up with the comms point, I think apart from the positive stories, I think it was more like an FAQs as well. I think, once you've got the bid, just being clear, because inevitably, the council and Councillor Shani will do a press release, and we could be on the doorstep and be like, oh, hang on a minute, you're giving them that. It's just an FAQs, a briefing of some kind would be helpful as well.
So you're talking about a briefing for us as councillors?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, even an FAQ for public, once you put something on.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Chalmer, yeah.
I think this might have been mentioned, but I just wanted to clarify. It's been said to improve coordination between different council departments and the VCFS organisations, which have historically worked, separately. I think we said that.
Well, I mean, so that I suppose that's part of what the bid ought to do. I suppose. So, I mean, we probably don't need a recommendation, because that's what it's intended to do, isn't it? Really? Yeah. Good. Okay. So if there's no other recommendations, so thank you very much. I mean, certainly, I'm sure we minuted various people have praised the EASY's volunteers and the fantastic work that they do, and we also very supportive and thankful that the Borough of Sanctuary bid seems to be going so well at the moment. So thank you to Helena for that. So that moves us on to just spend 2 minutes on panel work programme. Oh, sorry, also say thank you to Councillor Shani as well. Panel work programme. I'd ask you to note that the final meeting of the panel will be considering the work done to deliver connected communities, and there'll be a site visit. There's a site visit outstanding related to community engagement events, which isn't now going to be in Barking Dagenham, but looking at other options for that. Do I have any comments on the work programme? Well, there was a separate one. That was relating to the next meeting to the connected communities. There was a session this morning, but there's also going to be a visit to another borough, which is more looking back effectively to the work we were doing on the community engagement on the your voice, your town. Yeah. Okay, great. So no comments on the work programme. So finally, date of next meeting is the 22nd of April. So see you there. Sorry, it ran on a bit, but I think we had a very useful discussion and a lot of recommendations.